This pipeline reroute may look like just another HOA maintenance mix-up. A few workers, some pipes, and a lot of oops. Didn't realize that was your line. But it's not what you think. Because when they rerouted my water supply without asking, cutting pressure to my ranch, damaging my land, and brushing it off like a clerical error, they had no idea who they were messing with. See, I don't just live on this land. I built my life around it. And I don't yell or sue when someone crosses a line. I buy the map they're lost on. So when Karen and her clipboard brigade played plumber without permission, I made one phone call. And 5 weeks later, I owned their water utility. And then I tripled their rates. There are two things you don't mess with out here: someone's fence line and someone's water supply. I've owned this ranch for going on 15 years. It sits just past the city's reach, not too remote, but far enough that you depend on yourself more than a grocery store. When I first bought the land, it was dry, rough, and raw. But I saw the potential. And more importantly, I understood the bones underneath it. I come from a background most folks around here wouldn't guess just by looking. I worked infrastructure finance and utility project management before I traded my tie for a pair of boots. I know how a pipeline works, how easements are written, and what kind of red tape gets ignored until someone files the right form in triplicate. So when I bought this ranch, I didn't just buy grass and soil. I made sure I secured every easement, every utility right, every pressure reading in my contract. My water came through a private utility company that had been operating in this region for decades. Local, reliable, quiet. Just the way I liked it. My ranch isn't flashy. It's a working operation. Irrigation, livestock rotation, seasonal crops, with just enough room for a porch, a well-worn rocking chair, and the kind of peace city people pay consultants to find. The main pipeline fed the west field with a split leading to the barns and a gravity-fed irrigation system I personally oversaw. Everything on that system was dialed in to the decimal. Water was life, and I treated it that way. For years, things were simple. The nearest development was half a mile off, and the land between us was zoned agricultural buffer. No real activity except a few old trails and utility rights of way. Then came the signs. Future home of Crestwood Reserve, a premier HOA community. I wasn't too worried at first. These developments pop up every few years, bring in some noise, then settle into their own business. Most of the time, they're too busy arguing about mailbox heights to bother a rancher. But this one was different. First came the emails. Then came the flyers. Then came the questions. We're establishing a shared water conservation initiative and would love to know how your property manages runoff. Or, would you consider allowing our landscaping team to review your irrigation system for compliance with regional drought standards? At first, I was polite. Explained I wasn't part of the HOA, that my water wasn't their concern, that I was operating under a separate legal framework. But that didn't stop them. Karen was the president. Of course her name was Karen. White visor, clipboard, overly confident in her vague understanding of suburban policy and her ability to weaponize it. She came by once during calving season, unannounced, and started asking about pipe layouts and shared lines. I made it clear she was standing on private property and that any water questions could go directly to the utility company, where coincidentally, I sat on the advisory board as a silent partner. I didn't tell her that, though. Not yet. She nodded a lot, smiled like she was still in charge of something, then left. That should have been the end of it. But if you've ever dealt with an HOA president who thinks a sprinkler system entitles her to regional water control, you already know this wasn't over. The development started pushing right up to the edge of my property line. Pretty soon, what had once been buffer was now a community garden, then a dog park, then a shared green belt with trails, one of which ran dangerously close to one of my main control valves. I kept records. Every shift in the boundary, every fence post they removed, every access point they tried to beautify. Still, I played it cool. No yelling, no threats. Just measured emails, polite responses, and documentation. I figured if they kept to their side, I'd keep to mine. But power, real power, is quiet until it's threatened. And Karen was about to learn what happens when someone touches a rancher's water without asking. It started with a drip, not the kind you hear under a sink. The kind your fields feel first. The kind your livestock sense before you do. You learn to trust signs like that when your land depends on timing, temperature, and pressure. I was out near the south pasture when I noticed the troughs weren't filling right. Thought maybe a clog or a cracked valve. Happens once in a while. But then the west line was slow, and the main irrigation zone, the one feeding a fresh round of seedlings, barely sputtered at all. I checked my gauges. Pressure was down by 40%. Now, water loss like that doesn't just happen. I followed the pipe trail all the way back to the source, through the utility easement where the line had been untouched for years, until I found something new. Fresh trench lines, brand new PVC, and a secondary split running away from my fields. The line had been diverted, not just tapped, rerouted. As in, someone dug up my legal supply line, cut it, and fed it into a brand new pipeline leading straight toward the HOA's community garden and rec pavilion. There were new shutoff valves with bright yellow tags, still bearing the hardware store stickers. I took pictures, documented everything, then drove straight to the development. I didn't need a map. The pipe led me like a trail of breadcrumbs, right to the base of their irrigation manifold, humming like a happy parasite. Their roses were in bloom, their garden plots rich and watered, and my ranch was choking. I knocked on the HOA office door. Karen answered like she'd been expecting me. "Oh, you must be here about the line. We were hoping you'd understand. It was an emergency routing solution. We had a lot of residents complain about dry patches, and the city hasn't responded to our shared use easement request. So we made a temporary adjustment. Shouldn't affect you too much." She said it like she was asking to borrow sugar. I stared at her in disbelief. "You dug into a privately held water line, one that doesn't run through your property, doesn't belong to your HOA, and isn't part of your charter, and rerouted it without permission?" She shrugged. "We assumed it was part of shared municipal infrastructure. It's just water, after all." That phrase hit like a slap. It's just water. Just water. To them, it was landscaping, a prettier entrance sign, an HOA newsletter with happy garden photos. To me, it was operating lifeblood, keeping irrigation systems balanced, feeding livestock, keeping contracts alive. I had clients waiting on seasonal deliveries and animals relying on regulated flow. My ranch was built on planning and precision. I told Karen this was a serious violation, potentially criminal. She smiled and said, "Well, if you're that upset, file a complaint." And then she closed the door. The next week was hell. I lost pressure across the lower fields. One valve blew under strain. I had to hand-haul water to a section of livestock pens until I could rig a temporary tank. Seedlings in the new rotation died from dehydration. Thousands in loss, maybe more. And every time I drove past the HOA's green belt, I saw the water working. Their hose pipes were coiled like smug little snakes. Their flower beds dripped with my pressure. I submitted a formal inquiry to the utility company, but I already knew the answer. Their systems hadn't been adjusted. The change happened at the ground level. Someone tampered with my contracted delivery line without logging it. The utility tech, a kid named Roy who had the decency to be sheepish, admitted the company had no idea the line had been touched. "Sir, we don't have any routing orders for that area. Far as we're concerned, your line should be intact." It wasn't, and I had proof. I contacted a lawyer, began documenting every loss, every repair, every communication. I wasn't going to make this about emotion. I was going to make it about liability. I issued a cease and desist letter to the HOA board. Karen responded by forwarding it to legal. And in the meantime, they politely declined to interrupt current water use pending evaluation. Translation: "We're ignoring you because we think you'll go away." They didn't know who they were dealing with. I'd spent years building water systems, advising municipalities, and, more importantly, buying my way into influence with utility companies that didn't like being surprised. I didn't just know the rules. I helped write some of them. And the moment they decided my water was their property, they stopped being an annoyance. They became a case study. By the end of that week, I had more than just frustration. I had evidence. And evidence is leverage. I pulled out my original deed, utility contract, and pipeline layout. The easement was crystal clear. The utility company was allowed to run water to my land, with exclusive service rights across a buried line maintained jointly between us. It was protected by a right-of-way agreement that had been recorded years ago with the county. More importantly, the HOA's development, not even close to included in that original easement. So I dug deeper. I requested the latest county filings for utility adjustments in the area. Nothing had been submitted. No permits, no rerouting applications, no amendments to service lines. I visited the assessor's office in person to confirm, because I've learned people stall less when you're standing at the counter. It was exactly what I suspected. They had made a physical reroute to my water line without a single legal document backing it up. That's not just a mistake. That's civil trespassing. That's infrastructure tampering. That's actionable. But I wasn't interested in a drawn-out court battle. Not yet. I wanted to own the problem, not chase it. So, I turned my attention to the water company itself. The utility provider was small, private, local, and partially family-run. I'd worked with them once years back on an infrastructure grant. I remembered their org chart being short, their filings public, and their long-standing desire to grow or cash out. I checked the registry. They were still privately held. A few legacy shareholders. A majority owner nearing retirement. Board meetings that barely filled a cafe booth. And the moment I saw the name of the current director, I knew I had to move. Dale Whitman. I'd met him at a conference 5 years ago. Spoke on a panel about rural water access and multi-property infrastructure management. Dale was sharp, honest, and most importantly, frustrated with red tape. He'd once said, "I'd sell the whole thing if someone promised to run it cleaner than the state." That someone was me. I didn't go in loud. I went quiet. My lawyer contacted Dale's office under an LLC I use for investment projects. Fully legal, fully discreet. We arranged a private meeting to discuss options for long-term stability and shareholder value. Translation: I was coming with a checkbook and a clean operational plan. It didn't take much convincing. The water company had been struggling with modernization costs, staff turnover, and regulatory headaches. They wanted out, not because it was failing, but because it wasn't worth the grind anymore. What they needed was someone who understood water systems, respected legal contracts, and could ensure the system stayed reliable. I was that person. Over the next 2 weeks, we negotiated terms. I conducted due diligence, reviewed their books, and ran a third-party evaluation. The price was fair, a little high in places, but not enough to scare me off. More importantly, the buyout would include control of routing and maintenance policies, the legal right to enforce all active easements, authority to review any unpermitted physical modifications, rate-setting ability for non-agricultural users. By the time my lawyer sent over the final draft, I didn't just have leverage. I had ownership. From that moment on, things shifted. I walked back to the easement line, same spot where Karen had dismissed my concerns like I was a nuisance in her garden, and stood there with a blueprint in one hand and a utility director badge in the other. That new line? Unauthorized. That connection to their clubhouse? Illegally tapped. That smug idea that HOA emergency routing gave them power over my land? Dead in the water. And while Karen was still bragging in newsletters about how her garden team solved the drought issue, I was finalizing the first set of new utility policies. They were simple, legal, and elegant. Every property outside the original municipal zone, especially those with violation records, would be reassessed under the tampered line fee structure. In short, they'd be paying triple. But I wasn't finished. I drafted a full compliance letter to the HOA board. It included notice of unauthorized rerouting, an invoice for loss and recovery of water pressure, a formal warning of pending civil litigation, and a reminder that any future changes must be requested in writing. To me, the new owner of the utility company they just stole from. They had no idea who they were stealing from. They thought they were siphoning a few gallons for a garden. What they did was hand the keys of their entire water system to the guy they tried to cut off. And I was about to show them exactly what that meant. The ink on the acquisition contract was barely dry when I made my first executive call. The moment the county clerk's office confirmed the ownership transfer, I had full legal control of the utility company. Every route, every valve, every rate. That control didn't come with fanfare. No parade. No gavel drop, just a quiet database update and a folder with the authority to crush the HOA under the weight of their own arrogance. First order of business? Restore the original pipeline. I dispatch a crew from the utilities maintenance division to dig up and reroute the line back to its legal flow, to my ranch, uninterrupted. I had the photos, the maps, the easement documents. It wasn't even up for debate. And then came the notice of enforcement. It was sent via courier, email, and a certified envelope, addressed directly to the Crestwood Reserve HOA Board. Subject: unauthorized infrastructure use. Enforcement action #1449A. Effective immediately. All unauthorized routing from utility line #223A to the Crestwood Reserve Clubhouse and Community Garden is revoked. All connections, extensions, or unpermitted access points must be removed within 72 hours. Water supply to affected HOA zones will be reduced to emergency usage levels until infrastructure is brought back into legal compliance. Pursuant to the amended service agreement, Crestwood Reserve HOA will be assessed an infrastructure abuse surcharge. New monthly rate, $9,870.25, due on the 1st of each month. Non-payment will result in full disconnection. Signed, Director of Operations. My name, Utility Company letterhead. The board had their emergency meeting the next morning. Karen called my office 4 times before 10 a.m. Left voicemails sounding half angry, half confused. One of them went, "This can't be legal. You can't just raise our rates because of a mistake. We didn't know it was your line. We assumed it was shared." Ah, the magic word. Assumed. I didn't respond. Instead, I had one of our billing reps send a follow-up with itemized penalties including unauthorized excavation of private line, $2,500. Disruption of easement integrity, $3,200. Lost agricultural yield, documented $1,870. Emergency rerouting fee, $2,300. Surcharge for HOA negligence, $2,000. Total due within 10 days, $11,870.25. Failure to pay would result in permanent disconnection, followed by a lien. The clubhouse fountains were the first to dry up. Then came the garden hoses. Sprinklers sputtered to a halt mid-spin. Residents who'd once bragged about Crestwood's lush landscape began to notice crispy hedges and dry flower beds. Karen tried damage control. She blamed the utility company. But that was me now. She emailed residents that she was in active negotiation to resolve the matter. I made sure to publish a copy of the compliance notice on the utility's website, publicly available, with her name on the violation summary. It didn't take long for angry neighbors to do the math. Their dues were going up, their lawns were dying, and Karen had no authority to begin with. Some residents posted screenshots of the original waterline map I'd quietly leaked. Others showed my public deed. A few even reposted footage of the trench being dug, complete with HOA workers connecting plastic pipes in broad daylight, like it was a school project. By the end of the week, Karen's inbox was a war zone, and I still hadn't taken her calls. She finally got through via a desperate voicemail. "We're willing to return everything to how it was if you'll just reverse the surcharge and restore pressure. The board is panicking. People are threatening to sue. Please." But this wasn't about panic. This was about precedent. So I responded with a contract. Crestwood Reserve HOA may apply for reinstated service under the following conditions. Written apology acknowledging unauthorized use of private infrastructure. Agreement to new rate schedule, effective for the next 36 months. Acceptance of third-party inspections to verify no future tampering. No public denial of wrongdoing permitted in communications to residents. I gave them 48 hours. Karen called it extortion in a forum post. Her own board voted her out the next day. The new president, a retired lawyer named Doug, signed the agreement quietly and without theatrics. I could tell he'd read the fine print. He knew there were no loopholes. Crestwood Reserve was officially back in compliance. But their new water bill? It stayed exactly where I left it. And as for Karen, She moved out 6 weeks later. House listed under motivated seller. I heard her new place has a decorative fountain, one that runs on solar and rainwater. Smart move. By the time the next HOA newsletter went out, Karen's name was nowhere to be found. No apology, no farewell note, just a terse line buried near the bottom. Effective immediately, the board has accepted the resignation of President Karen R. We thank her for her service. That was it. No mention of the water debacle. No explanation to the residents about the thousands in emergency surcharges. But they knew. Everyone knew. You don't watch your sprinklers shut down mid-cycle, and your dues triple without asking questions. And the questions had all led back to her. The residents voted in a new board within the month. This one came in more humble, more cautious, and far less eager to start turf wars they couldn't win. Their first official act? Revising the HOA's Infrastructure Policy Handbook. Every mention of emergency authority was struck out. Any suggestion of unapproved easement access was deleted. From now on, every project involving utilities, pipes, trenches, or even hose bibs required written legal approval. That approval? It now came from me. I didn't push for more fines. I didn't sue. I didn't need to. Owning the very service they thought they could steal from was enough. But I did leave one reminder. Just inside the fence line, near the old trench they dug without asking, I had a small concrete pedestal poured. On it sat a digital water meter, bright, backlit, and updated every second. It tracked usage from my ranch and from the Crestwood Reserve line, separately. And right below it, I installed a bronze plaque. Next time, ask first. Private utility easement, enforced by ownership, not opinion. It became a minor local landmark. Neighbors driving by would slow down to read it. Some even posed for photos. The irony was thick and the message crystal clear. My ranch, watered, quiet, undisturbed. The crops recovered. The livestock thrived. And with the pipeline fully restored and no HOA games to deal with, I found time to expand a second greenhouse I'd been putting off for years. I kept the rate structure in place for Crestwood, not out of revenge, but because the cost of arrogance has to mean something or it gets repeated. And as for peace, it returned, but this time on my terms. No more whispered threats in HOA meetings. No more buried pipe games. No more emails about shared community responsibility. Just law, deeds, pressure, right where it belonged. If your HOA thinks they can reroute your water without asking, just remind them you don't need to shout to take control. You don't need to fight dirty or play by their rules. You just need the documents, the discipline, and a plan sharper than their ego. Because power doesn't always come from arguments or warnings. Sometimes it comes from ownership, the quiet kind, the legal kind, the kind with signatures and serial numbers. They wanted to tap into what I built, what I paid for, what generations of my family had depended on. They thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I couldn't do anything about it. But when your name's on the deed and the water valve, you don't need to yell. You just tighten the bolts, revise the rate sheet, and let the silence hit them harder than any fine ever could. So if you're out there dealing with a clipboard warrior, a smug Karen, or an HOA board that thinks they're one step ahead, don't panic. Just start reading your contracts, tracking your pressure, and sharpening your pen. Because out here, the pipeline flows both ways. And I own the faucet,